I had married outside of our culture. My parents didn't agree with my choice to begin with. So it was almost expected for my marriage to fail. And instead of my parents being really very disappointed, I had that pressure on myself to prove it to them that they were wrong and that I could make this work. So I think the entire marriage was me grieving who I really was to prove to my parents that I could make choices on my own and they could be good choices. So my marriage was less about the marriage and it was more about the culture, the expectations, the fear of failure, and most of all, my parents coming back to me and saying, "We told you so."
You stayed in a marriage a lot longer because you were afraid of them saying, "I told you so." Hello, everyone. I am Deepika Sandhu, the CEO of Soul Sparks Press, and you are in for an absolute treat because today I have the beautiful, the phenomenal, the wonderful contributing author to the Desi Divorcee, Jessie Arora. Hello, Jessie.
Hi, Deepika. Thank you for having me here.
I am so delighted to have you here because your words in the Desi Divorcee are absolutely touching, inspiring, and just exquisite on every level. It is a co-authored book. We have 12 authors in the Desi Divorcee, but I gotta say, your chapter just pulls at your soul. What was it that made you want to share it with the world?
Thank you for saying that, firstly. And it was the safety and the visibility that I received from you in our very first meeting. When we started to talk about the potentiality of writing that chapter, the way you heard me, the way you saw me, the way you experienced my story, and the way you motivated me is what wanted me to share that story in the world. Because my story is very different from yours, and yet we still shared the same feelings of sorrow and grief.
I really do, because the end of a marriage is absolutely a grieving process. But I think what is very unique to the Indian community, that no matter how modern or progressive it has become in so many aspects of life, one area where we are lacking, I would say, in our progression is divorce. Marriage is the pinnacle of Indian society. It is what every parent aspires for their child to get married. And when that marriage breaks down, it is something that leaves those of us who've experienced it feeling a lot of shame. And I know that was my experience, and certainly your experience, under very different circumstances. But the beautiful thing about this book is that we're trying to change that conversation and show women who are absolutely thriving post their Desi divorce. And you certainly are now.
I had married outside of our culture. My parents didn't agree with my choice to begin with. So it was almost expected for my marriage to fail. And instead of my parents being really very disappointed, I had that pressure on myself to prove it to them that they were wrong and that I could make this work. So I think the entire marriage was me grieving who I really was to prove to my parents that I could make choices on my own and they could be good choices. So my marriage was less about the marriage and it was more about the culture, the expectations, the fear of failure, and most of all, my parents coming back to me and saying, "We told you so."
You stayed in a marriage a lot longer because you were afraid of them saying, "I told you so."
Yeah, because they had chosen to stop speaking to me for multiple years. My mom would speak to me in secrecy or just very seldom. If my marriage failed, I felt like, well, they don't accept me while I'm with him, so why would they accept me back if it failed?
And things had to get very low for you to accept that they were failing, like very low. And that was a lot for you to move through in your life at that time.
I definitely felt very alone because the situations that I had gotten myself into and the co-creative outcomes of this marriage were leading to a lot of violence. And if I had spoken up about it to friends, they would tell me straight up, "You need to leave," or "We don't support this either." So instead of leaving, I would choose to let them go as friends. So not only did I lose my family dynamic, but I also lost a lot of friendships and a lot of other types of support in my life too. So I kept enduring until I felt so alone that it was just me and the cracked wooden floors drinking my tears.
And enduring physical, emotional abuse. That's a lot for you to have gone through.
But I also realized that it wasn't one way. I was very much co-creating this. I was very much responsible for that fear, for those choices, and for that dynamic that I was creating with them and with my family as well, and my friends. It was all choice. And I'm not blaming myself because I needed those choices to learn. But in my lowest lows, Deepika, that is when I came back to my spirituality. And that is when I came back to who I really was. You hear about people saying that you have to hit rock bottom before you can really start to rebuild. That was exactly what it was for me. That was my rock bottom. It just happened to be spread out over the span of 10 years.
You have a beautiful scene in the book where you reconcile with your parents. You walk into the family restaurant, which was on a street that you were avoiding constantly while you were married and while you were not on speaking terms with them. And you walk back into that restaurant to reconcile with them. And that is a powerful, beautiful scene of the way you reconnected with your parents. What is your relationship like with them now?
Oh, my relationship with them now is better than it's ever been. Better than before the marriage, better than during the marriage. And after the marriage, we still had a bumpy and rocky path, but it took almost 12 years for us to get here, to the point where I finally realized my mom is my biggest cheerleader and my dad only wants me to be happy. And they are so incredibly supportive that now, instead of abuse bringing me to my knees, now love brings me to my knees.
That's beautiful. For love bringing you to your knees. May we all experience that, please. I'll take some.
You know what I believe? I had to be heartbroken to be cracked open for love to enter.
Heartbroken to be cracked open for love to enter. That is so beautiful. And you've been on this exquisite spiritual journey as well, all of your life, but it feels like it took on a different turn post marriage. You do so much work with different types of energetics now, helping other people experience these things for themselves. And I'm really excited because you are going to do a full book with Soul Sparks Press on the spirituality of knowing oneself. Let's talk about this. What does it mean to truly know oneself?
I think to truly know oneself, we have to dismantle the concept of ego identities. And ego identities are what you think you are, what society tells you you are, what culture tells you you are, and what your parents need you to be and or expect you to be. So knowing oneself is, do you really believe that that is your identity? Or could you potentially be so much more and push against discomfort to explore who and what you are?
And you've gone through many different identities of yourself. So if anybody understands this, it's got to be you, right?
At least I feel that way, and yet I continue to explore and dismantle more ego identities every day.
How would you explain ego identity to someone who doesn't understand what that means?
To me, an ego identity is a source of attachment. So I'm attaching myself to a religion, to a practice, to a level of ascension or wokeness, or a title like sister, wife, female, South Asian. Those are all attachments to an identity that are temporary. Once this body disintegrates, what is your identity?
So the goal is then to attach to an identity that is bigger than any of those prescribed identities that we get connected with in this life.
Or perhaps to release all identities altogether. Because to give that larger source, universe, God, whatever you choose to call it, to give that an identity is impossible too, because it's beyond any identity. It is everything and nothing. It is light and dark. It is the void, and it is the filling of the void. So giving it a word And giving it an identity is actually doing it in itself an injustice. And if that's where we're all created from, then giving ourselves words, labels, titles, and expectations, that too then is an injustice to ourselves.
So if you want to leave everybody with one step they can take towards knowing themselves more, for moving towards the spirituality of knowing oneself more, what would that step be?
I think it would be to recognize that our time is borrowed on this earth. Our bodies are borrowed on this earth. Instead of identifying with what's happening on this earth, can we identify with what we take back to wherever we're going?
Leave it to Jessie to bring something big and deep for us to noodle on. This is beautiful, Jessie. It is such an honor to have you here today, to have you as part of Soul Sparks. Your words in the Desi Divorcee, like I said, are powerful. And I know your own full book on your whole life and your own story is going to be incredibly powerful also. And it's such an honor to bring that to life at Soul Sparks Press. And thank you for being my friend.
Oh my God, thank you for being my friend. I love you so much.
Thank you. I love you too. I adore Jessie Arora. And if you have heard her story and you are loving it and you want to bring your sweepingly inspirational story to life, we have a home for you here at Soul Sparks Press. Thank you.